presenting Maxwell Bridgewater as the protagonist in the real-life adventure tale, In Defiance of the Skeleton, Part 1. It was the third month of the third lockdown in Thailand. An emergency decree had been in place for months, so the island was empty and pleasure had been outlawed. Tendrils of restlessness dragged me from the lukewarm center and into the fringes. I woke up one day and could hardly breathe. The tendrils were wrapped too tight around me. Confronting this restlessness always happened like the flip of a coin, with triumph on one side and disaster on the other. All morning, clouds had been rolling across the Andaman Sea like magma, oozing out of fractures in the ground. Rain was a certainty. The cure for my suffocation could only mean one thing: a motorbike ride long enough to make me feel like I'd traveled somewhere. Confronting the restlessness that day would result in the flipped coin landing on its edge, straddled between triumph and disaster. I packed my bag with a plastic poncho and water bottle, shoved my head into the damp helmet, and turned on the motorbike's engine. Mosquitoes left their perches high on the villa walls and crept out from the grass to drink my blood as I sat idling, waiting for the sliding mechanical gate of our villa to open. I redlined it out of the driveway before they could bite. I started south on snake-like roads leading up to Promtep Cape, the southernmost tip of the island. From there I caught the full spanning view from which I could see the edges of the sky bubbling darker above gray waters. I tried to make sense of the weather, check the wind, make wild predictions, but it was a fool's errand. A woman ate lunch by herself under the atrium. The windmill at the Cape's peak spun so violently that I thought it would rip loose and hurl itself into the ocean. I'd been to this end of the island countless times, but never to the other end. Gliding back down the hill, I decided to travel the length of the island and see the northern tip. Phuket had been turned into a sandbox, a special tourism zone where the government had blocked travel between the island and the mainland. They shut the bridge down and restricted flights. Travel to the island had been reserved for vaccinated individuals who agreed to stay a week or two at the expensive quarantine hotels. When those tendrils of restlessness squeezed tight enough, the forbidden called to me like a siren. What lay on the other side of the bridge up north sounded interesting. Looking for trouble, I'd find it. I took the seaside route along the coast toward the bridge. I swung through Naiharn Beach and flashed through the tall pines and sped off around the lake. A pair of police officers mounted on a white motorcycle traveled around the lake going the other way. All year they'd been stalking for prey, cash bribe paydays from guilty foreigners during these meager times. I was happy I was on the other side of the lake. The roads were dry and empty enough to push the throttle. The route from Naiharn to Kata, my next waypoint, looked like a piece of spaghetti stuck at the bottom of a colander. It squirmed back and forth a dozen times. I weaved around corners toward the overlook and shot down the backside like a boulder rolling down a cliff. Each time I rode this way, I'd feel a oneness with the path, and that day was no different. I was an arrow piercing through the landscapes, past jungle brush creeping into the street, past little coves of dark waters, beaches where the satin blue ocean had been polished to glass just days before the weather changed. At the stop sign coming into Kata, I heard electricity buzzing through an outdated power line. It reminded me of the time I saw a dead body dangling off a thick wad of power lines while taxiing to a nightclub in Bangkok. Not that I'd seen any part of him roasted, but seeing the poor guy's body suspended and locked in place upside down made me think of a rotisserie chicken. Something about the way his elbows were locked at 90-degree angles disturbed me. I slowed down at Kata Beach and looked for anyone I knew. The bike shook going over roads that had been built like patchwork quilts, thrown together piece by piece over the years. These roads, smoothing out and widening between Kata Beach and Karan, allowed me to look left every few moments and see a vast ocean salted by whitecaps. Cats stretched and nibbled into matted fur, scratching the incurable itch. Slack-jawed dogs lay on warm pavement, sitting close to traffic, sleeping in the uncertainty like all of us had been doing. At the next hilltop, I looked down on Patong and felt the first raindrops. The descent into Patong became a rain-streaked blur, and I stopped enjoying the views. It was still a long way to the edge of the map. Imagining I could somehow beat the storm and find clear skies, I cranked the throttle and accelerated past shuttered storefronts and overgrown plots of land, past slender brown legs folded over one another in front of massage shops and whorehouses, howling past the monkeys and the black scorpions scuttling across the asphalt, only easing off the throttle once not to disturb a man and his elephant walking along the road, big brown eyes tracking me the whole time. Fallen palms and chocolate chunk rocks jutted up from green pastures, places I'd sat, each one bookmarking a moment in time, some of them fond, some of them hostile. Through the devil's playground where calls to holy prayer roused you from fever dreams, past the Buddha on the hill smiling down at us, past the hotel where I'd slept with the Russian reporter who whispered in my ear as we lay in bed, listening to an ambulance below. The pandemic is natural selection, she'd said. Past dark back rooms where men became handcuffed by topless women whispering, "I like you. You like me?" I cut through the mountains in the center of the island once I pushed beyond Kamala Beach and continued on the Central Highway north. Soaked by rain, I'd finally reached the farthest north I'd ever been on the island, to the airport, where few planes landed in those days. I'd memorized the cracks and indentations, every hazard on the roads near my house. But as I ventured out past the airport, unfamiliar roads demanded all of my concentration. In the forest beyond the reach of the ocean breeze, insects rose upward from the vegetation like steam and onto the open road. They smacked my helmet and my face, and when they didn't die on impact, they crawled around under my helmet and in my tangled beard. It was torturous, but I was too close to the bridge to stop. Way ahead on the highway in front of me, I saw cars stopped at the checkpoint. I was heading north on the road that would eventually lead me past the checkpoint and to the bridge. The checkpoint would have been, I had thought, the point of no return. I veered left onto a one-way road that circled clockwise around the checkpoint up ahead, 6 to 12 if the semicircle road was laid on top of a clock face. The one-way road swung back to the coast again, away from the checkpoint. Waves thundered on empty sand beaches, spotted with tall pines that loomed like monuments. A few fishermen shuffled off the beach. Cars and motorbikes rattled past me going the wrong direction, but they clung to the road's shoulders to avoid colliding with me. I wondered why they were all going in the wrong direction. I turned off the main road and stopped at a small patch of north-facing beach. I walked out on the sand and gazed past the plodding body of rusty seawater and toward the mainland. Later, a tattoo artist I met would tell me, with a smile on his face, that he was considering bringing people over from the mainland across that same stretch of water on a boat. "You know, those who didn't want to deal with the checkpoint," he said. "You mean like smuggling?" I pried. "I guess you could call it that," he said and laughed. To my right, I saw the bridge arching between the two land masses. Winds kicked up sand, and the rain came down thicker. I took a piss a few feet inside the woods and got back on my bike. I continued along the semicircle road, not wanting to drive in the wrong direction like everyone else. More cars and bikes rushed toward me in a single line on the shoulder. Fishermen, families on bikes drenched by rain, pickup trucks brimming with bananas and durian. I arrived at an intersection perpendicular to the northbound road I'd been riding on earlier, only now I was at its end. Strange, I thought. To my left, the bridge to leave the island. To my right, the road bent into the forest and headed back south. I'd reached the farthest I could go, I thought, without going off the island, and over the edge. Satisfied with the journey, not wanting to let arrogance push me over the edge, I played it safe and turned right. I knew there would be some issues if I crossed the bridge. I merged into southbound traffic that was spilling over the bridge. We traveled through the dark forest in a tight group. Tighter and tighter, the speeding cars and bikes ahead of and behind me clumped together. We rounded the bend in the road, slowed, and then stopped. Brake lights glowed in the drizzle. I looked ahead and realized I'd somehow gotten on the wrong side of the checkpoint. I was in line with everyone else trying to enter Phuket from the forbidden zone. Traffic split into 2 lanes ahead. A few dozen police officers in brown shirts and brown slacks stood under a white tent pitched over the road. Silver police vans with black tinted windows lined the shoulder. I took a deep breath to settle myself, realizing what was happening. Some in the line ahead of me were waved onward, while the rest were motioned toward the police station to the right. I chose the left lane, not too sure if it would make a difference. The car in front of me passed through the checkpoint, so I rolled up to the police officer in my line. Hopefully, he'd understand my situation, I thought. He wore a police cap and a blue medical mask. I could barely see his eyes. He made a motion with his hands and muttered something inaudible under the mask, so I handed him my license. He stared at it for a moment. His eyes darted between my license and my eyes, and I felt the dilation of time and the nausea of inevitability. "Where you go?" he asked. "Home," I said. "I live here." "Where you come from?" "I live here, Phuket." But there was no consideration given to my words. The decision he was about to make had been made long before I decided whether or not to follow the rules, or handed over my license, or said what I had to say. I stared at him, and he stared back. The young man in a blue mask and tan brown uniform swung his arm out wide and pointed to the police station with an outstretched hand. I looked over and deflated when I saw a line of police officers focused on me and motioning me toward them. He shoved the license back in my hand and waved the next car forward. With nowhere to go but forward into uncertainty, I kicked off and rolled toward the line of brown shirts. To be continued.